269, increasing access to truly affordable housing. Apart from the pandemic, there is no issue in my district that comes close to the cost of housing, and in particular, rental housing. I'm guessing that's true in many other districts. I'm happy to see in the bill that there are bond authorizations of 25 million for transit-oriented housing and 10 million for climate sustainable housing. Those grants or loans require that enough units be affordable so that 25% of the people in those developments can be at 60% of the area median income. This is really wonderful, although the cost of building housing is so high that we found a recent project where 35 million built only 500 units. We'll need more. I intended to use my amendment to apply similar standards to any housing choices provisions. Amendment 1, which was adopted, the first thing, is based on the governor's housing choices bill. That amendment, like the governor's bill and like the House version, requires that only 10% of the units be built under its provisions be affordable to people at 80% of the area median income. I intended to use this amendment to ensure that a housing choices program would require that 20% of the units, not 10, be affordable to people at 60%, not 80 of the area median income. Those are provisions very similar to those in the authorizations. The standards are very important. The crisis in housing is not in production of luxury housing. That is certainly getting built, believe me. 9 new luxury units have been built in my neighborhood this past year. The crisis is in housing for working people, middle income, and low income people. I'm disappointed that housing choices is a false promise that will produce almost no housing for working people and nothing for the lowest income folks without clear and better standards. The amendment by the housing chair, the gentleman from Lynn, makes some helpful changes to the governor's housing choices bill. It requires only a majority vote for adoption of an inclusionary zoning ordinance, and that's very important. It puts inclusionary zoning on the same footing as increasing density, although inclusionary zoning can also have very low standards for affordability. Amendment 1 also is an improvement on the governor's bill. It requires an annual report on progress toward goals. Of course, those goals are only goals, and they are for 20 years in the future. But the goal includes building 8,500 units affordable to people at 30% of AMI. That's extremely people in extreme poverty. And 85,000 at 80% of AMI, which you could have, you might be earning $90,000 for a family of 4. But meanwhile, it has a goal of 333,500 units for market rate housing. That's 400 units of housing for extremely low income people every year, compared to 16,000 of market rate unaffordable housing every year. That's the goal. Let's compare that to a recent report that said in Massachusetts there was a deficit of 170,000 units for people with extremely low income. Our goal would be to house 5% of the people with the greatest need, and that's in 20 years. The governor sold his housing choices proposal by convincing people that increasing housing supply will lower prices. The problem with counting on increasing housing production to increase affordability is that in cities and towns with low property values, building new housing close to transit drives up housing prices, causes gentrification, and leads to the displacement of low-income residents who may have nowhere to go. There is a lot of data showing this, which is readily available and is the subject of a future magazine article by one of my neighbors. I can offer the direct experience of my city of Somerville. Already before the housing boom here, it was known as having the densest population on the East Coast. Lots of luxury housing, apartments and condos are being added, some in Assembly Square, and often by converting formerly affordable three-deckers. 2,200 new units have been added in the last 10 years. And this is among the fastest increase in housing units in the metropolitan area, and we have the fastest rent growth in the metropolitan area and the third highest rents in the metropolitan area. If you think that adding new units will drive down rents, I invite you to visit my city. Somerville has a very progressive inclusionary zoning. In large developments, it now requires 20% affordability, but even with that provision, development is driving up property prices and rents. It is driving out low-income people. It is reducing our diverse population, which we so value. The governor's provisions, which we are adopting in Amendment 1, are that 10% of units should be affordable for folks who make up to $90,000 for a family of 4. In communities where most renters already pay more than 30% of their incomes on rent, housing choices will not come close to providing enough affordable housing for low-income residents and actually restrict housing choices for most low-income people. Just as an example of the need and the demand, Somerville recently offered 35 units of affordable multifamily housing in Union Square in a lottery. For 35 units, there were 3,400 applications. How about seniors at up to 80% of AMI? At current waiting list levels, it could take seniors up to 17 years to wait for senior housing. All of us know people on those waiting lists. I want to say one more thing about counting on producing more units to resolve the housing crisis. Luxury condos in Boston are a form of wealth storage, not necessarily contributing to the actual supply of housing. A new study looked at units in Boston at an average price of over $3 million. Of those luxury units, more than half, 64%, don't claim a residential exemption, a clear indication that condo owners are not using those units as their primary residence. I've talked to people in 2 large transit-oriented developments near me. Many, many units are empty. They are owned by people or entities, often foreign, parking their wealth. Finally, I want to make a connection also to the pandemic and health disparities. We know that the areas with the greatest concentration of cases are in places where people are crowded and doubled up. The people who are most likely to get sick or die are the people who live in those apartments. Housing justice and housing affordability are part of economic and racial justice. And housing affordability is part of public health. I want to quote a Haitian pastor who was in the Globe recently about why there is so much concentration of the virus in low-income communities. He said, I know of a house of 3 bedrooms that had 2 families, each with 4 children, and you can imagine the parents are working in a nursing home. As the chair of Elder Affairs, I am so conscious of how Massachusetts had over 60% of its COVID deaths in nursing homes. When direct care workers are underpaid, they work more than one job and carry the virus from place to place. We need to address, and they take it home and pass it around in their overcrowded apartments. We need to address their pay for sure. Fair and adequate pay is a big part of the affordability crisis. It's not just housing, it's pay. We need to do much more to raise the pay of low-income workers, and we need to do more to protect and provide housing for those essential direct care workers. Again, there are more progressive portions of this bill, but they are not enough, far from enough, to solve the housing crisis for low income and middle income people. I'm disappointed that the housing choices provisions will do so little to add opportunity for the people who need it, the people who do the work we now call essential, caring for older people, people with disabilities, children, serving in restaurants, working in grocery stores. I'm disappointed that my amendment to make the housing provisions more affordable. I hope that in other amendments or in action this year, we will do more to ensure housing justice and affordability and other protections for the people who can't afford decent housing and need those protections. Protections like eviction ceiling, right of first refusal, right to counsel, raft, vouchers, and yes, building enough truly affordable housing. Thank you, Mr. President. I am sorry that this was not adopted, and I look forward to working with you and other members to try to resolve the really deep problems of housing affordability. Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair thanks the gentlelady from Middlesex for remarks. Returning to amendment number 16, the senator from Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr, offers an amendment that the clerk shall read.
Amendment number